Starting us off at number 10 is Pennywise the Elf. Now elves I can definitely do, but not when they look like the clown of my literal nightmares and lucid dreams, which is exactly what this one is. Like, this elf is straight up sitting on this fireplace with a face that could kill. I don't even know if that's Pennywise trying to smile but just inherently looking creepy or what, but I'm royally screwed up about it. The parents that put this one up didn't just want their kids to just be nice kids, they wanted their kids to straight up be terrified of them, of Santa Claus, of being bad. They wanted their kids to regret every single bad thing they ever did. Who even made this? Where do you even get an elf like that? I'm just so confused. Like, is this like a special order elf? This elf has literally eaten other kids and is going to eat the kids of whichever house it's in now, so don't say I didn't freaking warn you, cause I did. Coming in at number 9 are the 3. What the hell is going on in this gif, you guys? What is this? We have 3 elves all with white glazed over eyes, and they're out here just chopping up 2 other elves. I feel like the middle female elf is in charge of what's happening. She's got stitches going across her forehead, she has these creepy pointy teeth, and you can see blood in her mouth, so clearly she's not only a scary elf, she's a cannibalistic one. And what I always say, you guys, in every video, well, the videos that apply, don't trust people who eat their own kind. That's like rule number 1. That's the first rule you should learn when you come out of the womb. You know what I mean? And why are they killing these poor elves? And it's just gory as well. The one on the right looks like a baby elf, like it's so small and they proper gutted it, intestines out and everything. The one on the left is getting his arm chopped off, so let's just say I'm very glad I'm not either of those elves, because I'd be screwed. At number 8 we have the zombie elf. I don't know who would think of an elf and be like, you know what, he's most likely a zombie, BRB while I fix him up. Like, I don't see the link between both at all unless the person happened to be watching The Walking Dead at the same time and got inspired. Like, that's the only logical explanation for all of this, and I fully believe that. Now, this elf's head is peeling off, his eyes are yellow and red, he's got pointed teeth with his jaw exposed because it's either been eaten off by another zombie elf or he got hungry and just ate it off himself. Sometimes you can't wait for dinner, what can you say? I've been that person. But the worst part is that his ribs are exposed because his skin has melted off, and oh, his intestines are coming out as well. I'm so confused, like, is this a Christmas thing or is it a Halloween thing? Like, someone please tell me what's going on. Filling on number 7 slot is family. I don't think there's a single thing about this photo that doesn't creep me out. Firstly, the elf's eyes are just staring at me a certain way, making me feel guilty when I know I haven't done anything wrong. Secondly, he's sitting so calmly like he just hatched an evil plan to kill me, and looking at me just putting him at peace. He's just so happy looking at me knowing I'm gonna die. And that's just him alone. Now we can get onto the 5 picture frames, all of varying sizes of this elf. Like, what did you do with the rest of my family? And why are all these pictures like those preteen photo shoots that girls do with their friends? Like, if I got home and saw this, I would 100% know that this elf has caused harm and will cause harm again. To me, specifically.
Number 6. Touching the elf can turn you into an elf. The number 1 rule when it comes to Elf on the Shelf is kids cannot touch the elf. If they touch the elf cannot fly back to the North Pole that night. Now, this is mostly just for deniability. If no one can touch the elf, then it's obviously not the parents moving it at night. It's just magic. Well, one day a boy decided to ignore this rule and touch his elf. The next day, the boy was nowhere to be found. He was missing. What was strange though was beside their elf, there was a mini elf on the shelf, and it looked exactly like the young boy. Days went on and the search for the boy continued until his father was cleaning and accidentally touched the elf. The next day he went missing too, and a 3rd elf appeared looking like the father. Soon the entire family, which was 5 of them by the way, all went missing. When police investigated, they went to their house and found 5 elves sitting on their fireplace, 1 for each member of the family. Number 5. They can be possessed. Ghosts and demons love to possess children's toys, and my question is, why? This story starts with a couple who decided they wanted to buy an elf on the shelf as a joke. They bought one, but they bought it from the dark web. Yep, the doll was marketed as a possessed elf on the shelf, and they thought it was a good idea to buy it. So they purchased it, but as soon as it arrived to their house, things got weird. I wonder why. Paranormal events started to happen, and they were haunted for months. All I gotta say is, they did it to themselves, so am I really supposed to feel bad for them? Number 4. They will move in front of you to scare you. This story was posted on Reddit with the title, "I've seen my elf on the shelf move multiple times and I'm freaked out. Real story, need answers." The post reads, "I'm a teen and I've had a couple elves on the shelves. I never knew if my parents moved them or not, but then something strange happened. The first thing that happened was I was standing in front of my Christmas tree where my elf was sitting on, and I kid you not, it jumped over my shoulder. It did not fall, it went up and over. The next thing that happened was I was sitting on the couch and the elf was next to me. It turned its head. Call me crazy, but I saw this happen. I was freaked out. The last thing that happened was I heard something rustling in my vents, and the next thing I know, there are jelly beans being thrown at me. Then I hear a screw fall, and the elf fell out of the vent onto my brother's back. The elf has also moved when I was home alone. I don't know how this happened, and I think it's safe to say it was not my parents. Does anyone have answers? I cannot stress this enough. This is not a fake horror story. This really happened." Number 3. The elf is there to torment you. An elf on the shelf being sold on eBay. Not too strange, right? Wrong. The seller was selling it because as soon as she took the elf on the shelf and put it away, strange things started happening. Let this be a lesson to us all. Keep the elf on the shelf. The owner took a picture of the elf with a knife and texted it to her husband. "Ha ha ha, look at this. That elf is crazy. Oh well, time to pack him up because he's kinda creepy." That's when it all started. Footsteps were heard walking down the hallway when no one was there. The doorbell would ring on its own at different times during the day. And one night, the owner was sick and slept in the living room on the couch by the Christmas tree where the elf was at the time. She had terrible nightmares. Then, when she woke up, the elf was inside the cuff of her pants. Ew. She also said she saw a tall black figure in her house and that was enough for her. So she sold it to some unsuspecting fool on eBay for $39.99. Think about it. Someone literally paid $39.99 to be tormented by an elf. Couldn't be me. Number 2. The elf works for the CIA. The idea of the elf is that he watches you during the day to make sure that you're behaving, and at night he goes and reports it to Santa. With these dolls, there have been some pushback from parents as they argue that Elf on the Shelf is conditioning young minds into blindly accepting surveillance at all times. Now, people have gone a step further, saying the book and the elf were all created by the CIA and is an operation to covertly steer the public consciousness of early brains towards normalizing a surveillance state, disguising themselves as a cheery Christmas toy company. Is this really that far-fetched though? I don't think so. Number 1. You can trick the elf. Now, this sounds crazy considering all the other stories we heard, but apparently one young boy was able to trick the elf and still have a good Christmas. The story goes, there were two brothers. One was rather nice all the time, and the other was quite naughty. That is, until it was Christmas time. The naughty boy knew that his grandma's elf on the shelf would be watching him, so he always acted good during the holidays. That was until one day, he and his brother were play wrestling and accidentally kicked their Christmas tree and various ornaments fell off and broke. This happened in front of their elf and the boy was horrified, thinking he wouldn't get anything for Christmas. So he took matters into his own hands by doing something like a million times worse than accidentally breaking some ornaments. He ended up brother and his face, wearing it as a mask. He went up to the elf pretending to be his brother and apologized for the accident. When their grandma came back, he fake cried and said that his brother's death was an accident. You know, his face just came off by accident. No biggie, no biggie. The story ends with the boy being locked away in the hospital for Christmas. He was happy though, as he still got presents Christmas Day. My question is, how did he think killing his brother was better than accidentally breaking something? Or maybe, just maybe, did the elf possess him to kill his brother? Who knows?
At number 10, Elf on a Shelf reporting to Satan. When two children named John and Daphne were growing up, they had an elf on a shelf named Lucy. She was always a little trickster year after year. But the year after John turned 10 and Daphne turned 7, the habits of the elf changed. Over the holidays, instead of doing innocent tricks and leaving out treats, Lucy began to leave out messages in strange patterns. It asked for a task to be done, for dolls to be placed in certain weird arrangements. It also asked for strange markings to be drawn in chalk on the garage floor. So then, one day, the children's mother came home after they completed all of these tasks. She was bringing groceries into the garage when she saw it. She dropped everything. Bottled eggnog shattered across the ground, chestnuts rolled across the concrete. Her children had marked out sigils of summoning Satan onto the ground. Lucy the elf sat in the center of the sigil, just staring at her. The children were in a trance. They said Santa would be happy now, and then they started chanting, Santa, Santa, Satan, Satan, and then the family moved out of the house, never to be heard from again. That definitely is an event that could scar you. On to number 9, Elf in Dreams. When David was young, he remembers stories kids would say about the elf on a shelf. One friend told him one specific one. There was a story of a girl who had dreams where the elf would be moving next, and then night after night, her predictions came true. It started off as a fun game. This girl was seeing if she could predict the future. She kept bugging her little sister and telling her, hey, I know where it's gonna be tomorrow, I know where it's gonna be the next day, I'll tell you in the morning, and it happened day after day. But soon she realized that she wasn't really seeing the future. The elf had gotten into her dreams. Slowly, the elf moved throughout the house closer and closer to the little girl's room. In the dreams, it went to the living room, then to the hallway, then right outside her door. But it kept moving towards her little sister's room. At that time, it seemed like it was heading to the back of the house, so she kinda let it be and thought it was leaving. But no. The night before Christmas, she had a dream that the elf went into her little sister's room. She fought herself awake in the middle of the night and moved to her sister's room to protect her, like a good big sister, and she held her to protect her from the elf. But when she woke up, the only thing in her arms wasn't her sister, it was her elf, and her sister had disappeared. And that's where the story ended that David heard. But let's move on to number 8, Gone and Back. So a family in Nevada told a story that they heard from relatives. A cousin had purchased an elf on a shelf kit just a couple years ago and had used it for a bit. But then one year, as they went to retrieve it from storage, they just couldn't find it. It kind of seemed the right time to stop with the elf on a shelf, so they let it go and ignored it. Then years passed, and then when the cousin went looking for some old silverware one time around Thanksgiving, they saw it. The elf on the shelf was just sitting on top of a rubber storage bin where it was lost years ago. It stared right at her. An eerie feeling washed over her, and she moved it to the living room anyways. It's just a doll, right? And maybe it was just a draft. But that night she heard a voice before she fell asleep that said, not enough. And then when she woke up the next day, the elf was gone. It's back and then gone. Just kind of creeped her out. On to number 7, elf choking someone. So, a family decided to get an elf on a shelf for the first time for their son, hoping he would get some enjoyment out of it. The second they got the elf, he already seemed to be weary of it. That first night, the boy woke up with the elf's long, thin red arms around his neck. He was terrified. Rightly so. He could hear his parents walking down the hall and were hoping they would get to him soon. But the pressure was already surmounting and he began choking from it, the arms going around his neck. It almost became too much to bear and then the door opened. The second his parents came into the room, the pressure stopped and all the parents said was, "Aw, he's giving you a hug." And yes, the pressure relented, but only until the next night.
And our number 6 is Mr. Sparkles. What the hell is this? I don't even know what creature this is, but it does have fantastic bone structure, I will give it that. Those cheekbones are honestly sharper than the knife some of my friends have used to stab me in the back. I love my jokes, I really do. Anyway, Mr. Sparkles was marketed as an alternative elf for your shelf, and I feel like we have very different definitions of alternative. It looks like Sparkles' face has melted, his nose is fully not there, I don't know where it is, I wasn't able to locate it for this video, I'm sorry about that. His smile is also melting off, so there's that. He looks like he wants to kill himself and that he already did, but his maker was like, nah, you ain't getting off that easy, I'ma sculpt you back together. And I feel like no one is buying this, like I appreciate your effort, but nobody is buying this. Coming in at number 5 is Mum of the Year. Around 2 Christmases ago, Brittany Meese admitted she's that over-the-top Christmas perfect mum. Her family elf is called Elphys, and so one day when her kids weren't looking, Brittany tried to move the elf, but they came back into the room too early, so she kind of just shoved Elphys into the oven thinking she'd move him later. Completely forgetting Elphys in there for a few days, she went on to cook something for the kids and turned on the oven. You can well imagine what happened next. Elphys got burnt and mangled to a level no elf should ever be. His head was almost sinking into himself, his feet were melted, his neck was melted, it was truly a tragedy. Now when looking at the show, one of her kids started hysterically crying, one started screaming, one started bugging Brittany to call Santa so he could save Elphys, and the other kid was just glad the snitch was dead. Which kid would you be in this situation? I'd 100% be the last. Snitch is dead. Bye. And number 4 is the serial killer elf. Now there are so many things an elf should be. I'm talking cute, willing to make and distribute presents, be a sweet friend, and maybe a shoulder to cry on if need be. But the one thing that they definitely should not be are serial killers, and that's exactly what this one is. He's literally wearing the Hannibal mask, and I'm like, dude, just eat me now and just save me the horror, honestly. The elf's got blood on his gloves, on his shirt, on his face, it's seeping out of his hairline. Like, did he just eat one elf or did he devour the whole population? And can you just stop for a second second, can we all just stop and imagine the effort that went into making this elf-sized Hannibal mask just for this elf on a shelf? Like, these parents went to a great deal of effort to be weirdly bizarre. I mean, if that's your king, you can go for it. Filling our number 3 slot is red rum. I always saw people getting red rum tattoos and writing it everywhere when I was growing up, and it took me so long to figure out that it said murder backwards. And I was like, oh wow, so edgy and hipster, you guys. Haha, you're so cool. But this elf on a shelf is the furthest thing from hipster, and is actually the closest thing to haunting you in your sleep. It's literally sitting in the bathroom, not even on a shelf, and it's holding a bloody knife. And if it was a blunt knife, I would have been like a lot more okay with it, but it's freaking serrated, you guys. You know a serrated knife is serious. We're not screwing around with a serrated knife. Like, you already know that will cut deep. Like, it'll cut you the way you cut a piece of lamb and you can see the muscle fibers just tearing. Like, that's gonna be you. Congrats. Merry Christmas. Now, above the elf and weapon is the word red rum written in what looks to be blood. Like, whose blood is that, mate? Is it one of the parents that brought you and put you there? Is it one of the kids doing drugs in that bathroom? Like, who did you kill? I need to know. But I'm just glad it's not me, so I don't really care. Now, at number 2 is Billy the Puppet. Now, if you've seen any of the Saw movies, then you know how gruesome they are, and you also know the feeling of wanting to take Billy the Puppet and rip him a new one. I've never wanted to kill a puppet more in my entire life than I've wanted to kill that one, so you already know what's going on. This elf isn't even on a shelf, it's on the toilet roll dispenser in someone's house, and it's wearing the mask of Billy the Puppet. And it's not even bloody toilet paper on the dispenser, it's duct tape. You know, the kind of serial killer puts on your mouth before he tortures you for information you don't even have? Yeah, that kind. And the cherry on top is the sign next to the elf that says, I want to play a game. Like, imagine these kids just looking forward to Christmas and trying to have such a jolly December, but they can't because their parents are freaking freaks and want them to shit themselves out of fear, not need, every time they go to the bathroom. Like, I just don't need that negative energy in December. I don't need it. The decade is over. I don't need you being weird around me. Like, what does that even imply? Like, if I was naughty this year, you're gonna cut my arm off? Like, is that what I take from this? Like, what is happening? And finally, at number 1 is the monster elf. Bruh, what the hell is this? It was being sold as a horror demon evil elf on the shelf, and I was like, say no more, I'm not purchasing this. If I saw this in my house, I would actually just full on move house, no hesitation. I feel like this isn't even something parents would buy, this is something that would just end up in your house on its own accord somehow. But to its credit, I feel like that's what actual elves do look like. They don't look like that cute small human versions we actually see. But to its credit, I feel like that's what actual elves look like. They don't look like the small cute human versions that we actually see. The reality is in fact that creepy. I just hate the full black eyes and the lines going through its eyes and its mouth. Like, why? That was a design feature that just didn't need to be there. If that was in my room, I know it would give me nightmares. Like, how can it not looking like that? That's the kind of doll that either possesses you or kills your whole family. There is a no in between. And for the full frontal view, here is a picture. Need I say more? I don't think so.
Number 10. The elves are voodoo dolls. In one neighborhood, a lot of families who had an elf on the shelf said their elf went missing. Even if they replaced them, the elf would disappear again. All these families had been wondering where these elves had gone, until one day, when a boy from one of the houses was walking outside, he stopped in front of a quiet house on a corner because out of the corner of his eye, he saw a cat with one of the elves in its mouth. He was excited, thinking he found his family's elf, so he went and told his family. The family went to the house and they found that the door was open, so they decided to go in. The house was pretty empty, and when they called out, no one answered. As they reached one room, they discovered it was filled with a bunch of elves on the shelves. There were hundreds of them, and they all had pins and needles stuck in them. The family walked into the room and saw one elf sitting alone in a chair. The boy ran towards it, thinking it was his, and the family heard laughter behind them and an old man's voice saying, "So it works." Keep in mind, they were the only people in the house. So due to this, the family screamed and they left. Number 9. The elf can infiltrate your dreams. A young girl kept having dreams of where the elf would be the next day, and then it would come true. It started off as a fun game for her, and she started telling her younger sister that she knew where the elf was going to be the next day. Her sister didn't believe her, but she was right, day after day. Soon she realized that she wasn't seeing the future, but that the elf was controlling her dreams. Slowly, day by day, the elf moved closer and closer to her and her sister's rooms. The night before Christmas, she had a dream that the elf went into her little sister's room. She woke up after the dream, and in the middle of the night, she went to her sister's room to protect her. She got into her sister's bed and held her all night. But when she woke up, she wasn't holding her sister, but the elf. Turns out her sister disappeared, and they're pretty sure it had something to do with the elf. Number 8. The elf moves freely, even if it's not Christmas time. Obviously, the elf moves around the house each day in December leading up to Christmas. But what if it actually moved in the off-season? After Christmas, families put their elf back into storage with the rest of their Christmas decorations, but something happened to a family from Nevada. They had been using their elf for years, and they put their elf back in storage after Christmas time, but when they went back to get it the next year, it wasn't there. It was missing. They couldn't find it, but their kids were older and it seemed like a good time to stop doing Elf on the Shelf, so they didn't think much of it. Then, years passed, and when one of the family members was searching for something, they found the elf. It was just casually sitting on the rubber bin where it usually was before it was lost years ago. The elf stared at them, and it gave them an eerie feeling, but they put it in the living room anyway. That night, right before they fell asleep, they heard a voice say, "Not enough." Then, that morning when they woke up, the elf was gone, never to be seen again. Number 7. The elf's name is important. A rule with Elf on the Shelf is that the family must give their elf a name. Typically, these are silly names that people name after Christmas things like Snowflake or Twinkles. But you have to make sure that you stay away from certain names. Why? You could run the risk of a devilish possession. Names such as Lucifer, Bile, and Gorgo are big no-nos as they are Inferno names. Inferno names are names that are linked to anti-hero figures used in satanic rituals. If you ever give your elf one of these names or any others on the Inferno list, then you open the door for your elf to become possessed by a demon. Just because the door is open doesn't mean that just any demon will walk through it, however, you don't want to be giving them the option to. This is a happy time full of friends and family and most importantly, love. But if you're a demon, it's one of the worst times of year for you and you want to wreak havoc and ruin the fun. If a demon gets into your elf, there's no limit on the chaos it can cause and it could stay for an unlimited amount of time. With that in mind, I'd stick to the silly Christmas names.
On to number 6, Elf on a Shelf at a daycare. So one family that didn't have an elf on a shelf still had a haunting experience. They regularly had their son Charlie in daycare because they both worked pretty full hours. The daycare had decided to get an elf on a shelf. So the son told his parents that the elf on a shelf just creeped him out. And yes, it moved every day and the parents tried to explain that this was normal, that the elf on the shelf was reporting back to Santa and so it moved, but the opposite of nice was happening at the daycare. It was, instead of it helping keep the kids in line, it seemed to be doing the opposite. There were more reports of toys being tossed around, and Charlie kept saying that the elf was doing it. That's what all the kids were saying. The daycare staff told all the parents this and to keep an extra eye on their children because they think the kids were doing it, but then it just kept getting increasingly worse. The children began to say the elf would move, blink at them, turn and look at them, and whisper to them. All of them were too scared to repeat what it said. Then, one day, one kid disappeared from the daycare and the staff were flustered without an explanation. The elf had disappeared too. And then nothing else was said of it and Charlie was pulled out of that daycare. Parents heard nothing of the story again. On to number 5. Possessed by a ghost. So one family had an elf on a shelf for years, but it only started acting differently once they moved houses. It went from being a trickster to being much more malicious. Instead of moving at night, it would move during the day. Welcoming messages turned sinister, with repeated messages of, "I'm watching you." Anytime a family member or guest of the house looked at the doll, they would feel an immense pressure on their chest, and a presence around them would feel like it was closing in. It would only stop when they looked away or walked away. Then one night, the youngest in the family went up to touch the elf and fainted on the spot. So after that, they moved the elf to the attic. But just the next day, it came back down and was found in their living room. That family's personal solution was to burn the doll and then sage the entire house. And the legend goes that that seemed to have worked. So pro tips, just so you know. On to number 4, more dolls. The first time the Jennison couple bought the elf on a shelf, they were just really excited. They had one daughter and many dolls throughout the house. They were collectors of a sort. And obviously this was just another token to add to the collection. So when the elf on the shelf arrived, everything began acting strange. The elf on a shelf would be moved to the kitchen, and then the order of all the other dolls were mixed up. Mr. Jennison asked his wife if she was playing a prank on him, but her content expression fell as she revealed she believed he was playing a trick on her. Over the nights, the dolls kept moving and the tension between the couple grew as they didn't believe one another. Leading up to Christmas Day, the dolls moved closer and closer to the living room, and the couple kind of let the argument rest as it began to seem cute, gathering of all their precious dolls right in one room. But then, on Christmas Day, the smell of smoke woke them up. They ran to the source and in the living room sat their new elf on a shelf, facing the fireplace. It faced where all of their dolls lay, on fire, stacked so tall in their fireplace that smoke was coming into the house. The couple started screaming at one another, throwing accusations at the other one. Then their daughter walked into the room, sat on a chair in the corner, and looked at the elf in the center of the room with a smile, watching her parents argue. On to number 3. A child turned into one. So one urban legend is that the story goes that the elf on the shelf isn't truly an elf at all, but a lesson. Apparently, the naughty list was so rampant that the North Pole deemed that a message should be sent to all of the children. They had gone too far. It was decided that the best way to keep children in line was to make examples out of them. And so legend has it that it's not an elf on your shelf, but a child trapped forever in a doll looking out for your mistakes, hoping to one day be free. Free him. On to number 2. Voodoo doll. So in one neighborhood between December 1st and 10th, a lot of families that had elves on shelves said they kept going missing. Even if they replaced them, gone again. There was no apparent reason. All of these families were wondering where they had gone until one day a boy of the neighborhood was passing by a quiet house on a corner. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw in the window a cat with a familiar elf in its mouth. In his excitement, he went to tell his family, and the family returned to the house. They found that the front door was open and they decided to explore. Most of the house was desolate, save for some dusty furniture, and no one answered when they were calling out. But one room in the house was quite full. Elves from Elves on a Shelf lined the shelves of an old study. There were hundreds. All of them had pins and needles stuck inside their bodies. The family walked in and saw one elf on a shelf sitting by its lonesome right across from them. Their son ran to it thinking it was theirs, calling out its name. Then they heard laughter behind them. "So it works," an old man's voice said, and the family screamed. Who knows what happened, but only one family member escaped. The little boy was found wandering the local park in the snow, clutching the elf, taking pins out of its body. His parents never to be found again. And number 1. Being watched. To save money, one family decided to get an elf on a shelf doll used. They got one from a man who said his family grew out of it and wanted to pass it along. They moved it throughout the holidays, mainly keeping it in the main area, but moved it to the kids' room every once in a while. They began to hear a whirring and buzzing noise coming off it. First they brushed it off as the radiator, and then it was close to the fridge, so that was another way to brush it off. But when it was in their daughter's room, she said she heard beeping. The parents were thrown by this since they kept technology out of their daughter's room and there was no reason for there to be a buzz. They ripped open the doll to find hardware in it and a camera, right where the eyes were. After going to the police, they found out that the man who sold them the doll was wanted for a myriad of crimes. And so, watch out for use.
Starting off this countdown, we have the reappearing elf. So this story was posted on Reddit and this user claims that it's a real story. So one day during the holiday season, they were unboxing all their Christmas decorations. You know, trying to decorate and get in the festive spirit. But while going through their boxes, they noticed their elf on a shelf was missing. Apparently, they always placed it in its original packaging so the little small toy wouldn't get lost. But this year, it wasn't in the box at all. After searching for several minutes, they gave up and just decorated the house without it. But several days later, the elf randomly showed up on top of some boxes, just right in plain sight. This person literally searched all over for this elf, and then it just magically appeared right in front of his eyes. That's pretty creepy if you ask me. I'm telling you, those things are cursed. Moving on to number 9, we have the living doll, and if you guys are liking this video, obviously give it a big thumbs up, you know, spread some holiday joy. This story surrounds an elf on the shelf that would move by itself without a member of the family moving it. Now, the dad just thought that his family was playing mind games with him. Every morning, the elf would be in a new spot, but everyone swore that they didn't touch it. The dad, being fed up with this, decided to set up the dog cam one night and pointed it directly at the elf. The next day, of course, the elf was moved, and again, his family swore that they didn't touch it. The dad, thinking that he caught his family moving the elf, went to review the footage, but he found something quite horrifying. The footage showed the doll moving on its own. His family was right, they weren't touching it. The doll was alive and moving by itself. Coming in at number 8, we have the whispers. Kids often have a wild imagination, which is why some parents don't always believe what their kids are telling them, especially if what they are saying sounds downright impossible. So one night this young girl went crying to her mother, telling her that she woke up to the elf on the shelf whispering evil things into her ear. Of course, the mother just brushed it off and told her that she was just having a nightmare. But this continued to happen. The girl would often wake up screaming after hearing a creepy voice whisper in her ear. The doll would tell her to do things like to go hurt her sister or parents. The mother started to get concerned, so one night she decided to sleep in the same bed as her daughter. And sure enough, around 3 a.m. she woke up to the sound of someone breathing in her ear. She turned, and laying beside her was the elf on the shelf. Moving on to number 7, we have the invisible voices. Okay, this next story is pretty creepy. I don't know what to make of it. So one day in the middle of December, a family was startled when their Amazon Alexa started going off by itself. It was talking as if someone else was talking to it, but no one was in the room. Initially, they ignored it thinking that it was just some glitch. But this happened a few times every day. And Alexa would start saying scary things like, "I'm sorry, I can't find any results for 'I'm coming for you,' or 'I can't find any results for 'take me off this shelf.'" When they heard the last one, they noticed that the elf on the shelf was right beside the Alexa. So they believed that somehow the elf was sentient and could communicate with their Alexa. So there you go, maybe Alexas can communicate with ghosts now.
Number 6. The elf misbehaves and blames it on the child. Like mentioned before with the demons, they want to create havoc. So why not create havoc and then blame it on poor little kids? A family sent their child Charlie to daycare, and the daycare had an elf on the shelf. Charlie told his parents the doll creeped him out, but the parents explained that it was all make-believe and there was nothing to be scared of. Instead of keeping the kids in line, they were misbehaving, or so it was thought. When the elf was out, there were more reports of toys being tossed around, and Charlie kept saying that the elf was doing it, along with all the other kids. The daycare staff told the parents about this behavior because they believed it was all the kids. It just kept getting increasingly worse, and the kids said the elf would move, blink, and even whisper to them. All the kids, though, were too scared to repeat what the elf said. Then, one day, a kid disappeared from the daycare without a trace, and the worker noticed that the elf was gone too. It was believed that the elf took the child, and Charlie's parents pulled him out of that daycare. Number 5. Real-life people are spying on you. As mentioned before, the whole point of the elf is to watch you and make sure you're behaving well so you'll get good gifts for Christmas. It watches your every move, and not just the child's, but every single person in the house, even the dog. It's believed that the elf will bring this information to Santa, but what if you're being watched for a different reason? A family in 2011 had an elf on the shelf for about 3 weeks until they noticed it wasn't a regular doll. This elf had a camera inside of it recording them and sending the footage to some sort of feed. The camera was dead when they found it, but they had no idea how long it had been recording them. This sparked the theory that Elf on the Shelf is a method for big corporations to get inside our homes and get information about us. We have Amazon Alexas to listen to us, so why not have a Christmas elf record us? People have gone further and theorized that the government is behind it, like some sort of Big Brother thing. It was never figured out who put the camera in there and where the footage was going, and I'm sure the family never got another elf. Number 4. Do not mistreat the elf. Or else. Like the rules state, you cannot touch the elf. If you touch the elf loses all its magical powers. If by chance an elf is touched by accident, the child has to write an apology letter to Santa. Then, before bed, they have to sprinkle cinnamon around the elf and leave it overnight. If you do this, its magical abilities will return and the elf will go back to the way it was before. However, there is a legend that says if you hit, throw, or mistreat the elf in any way, instead of the elf losing its powers, you turn the elf into a force of evil. Like the urban legend of Krampus, where you are punished if you are naughty, the elf will do something similar, label you as a bad kid, and you will go on the naughty list. Now that you've mistreated the elf, it will go from nice and sweet to just plain evil and will make you pay for what you did. Instead of going back to the North Pole to report back to Santa in the night, it will sneak into your room and do what you did to it. It will torture you by slapping, hitting you, and overall mistreating you. Now, its only mission is to make you feel the pain that it felt. It wants revenge. It's said that this will happen every night leading up to Christmas when the elf would go away. And apparently, if you try to kill the elf or get rid of it, it will find its way back into your room at night and be even angrier. So whatever you do, do not harm the elf. Number 3. The elf could be a demon. Legend says there is one elf that isn't a real elf on the shelf. It's said to be a demon named Mormo who pretends to be an elf. Mormo is a spirit whose name in the past was invoked by mothers and nurses to frighten children to keep them from misbehaving. With that in mind, it makes sense why it would pretend to be an elf on the shelf. Now though, all this demon wants to do is kill. This legend started after a brutal murder took place where a man and a woman were killed in a way where police had an extremely hard time understanding it. When police arrived on the scene, there was blood everywhere and the couple were laying on the ground in the middle of the living room. There were no indications of a break-in and nothing was stolen. The first theory was it was a murder and then the other took their own life, but that didn't make sense. There had to be a third person involved. One thing that stood out to police though was the blood-splattered elf on a shelf positioned on their mantelpiece in full view of everything. The police never figured out who killed this couple, but people started speculating it was Mormo. The theory is every time you buy an elf on the shelf, you're taking a chance of it being Mormo. If it is Mormo though, it is said that you and your family will die in an unexplained way right before Christmas. Number 2. The story was created by a demon. It's said that this entire Elf on the Shelf story was actually created by a demon. The entire premise of Elf on the Shelf is a little creepy to begin with, but it's for Santa, so nothing can go bad, right? Well, what if it wasn't reporting back to Santa, but a demon? In 2008, a woman who had an elf on the shelf started to notice things going missing from her home during the Christmas season when her elf was out. First it was keys, then kitchenware, and it progressed to valuable items. She also started to notice that all of a sudden things started going wrong. This included newer appliances breaking and needing to be replaced, leaks happening, and issues with electricity. She had no idea why this was happening until she realized it all started happening when she brought the elf into her house. Since then, other people have reported things missing from their house right around Christmas time when they brought their elf out. It's said that things had gotten worse the longer the elf was in the house. There's a whole community who's convinced that these elves don't work for Santa, but a mischievous demon who encourages them to do these things. The goal of a demon to wreak havoc and create chaos in your home. Like, Christmas in general already isn't crazy, and a demon has to make it worse. Number 1. The elf is actually a child trapped inside. One legend says that the elf on the shelf isn't actually an elf, or wasn't always an elf. It is said that one year the naughty list was so full and so many children were misbehaving, so the North Pole deemed a method should be sent to all the children who had gone too far. It was determined that the North Pole wanted to make examples out of these children, so they turned them into an elf on the shelf, which they have to be for all of eternity. The idea was that the child and the elf would watch other children and make sure they behave and don't make the same mistakes they did. So yeah, not an elf, but a trapped soul of a naughty child in a plastic toy.
Starting us off at number 10 is the legend of the poisonous poinsettia. They are a very popular Christmas decoration because their leaves turn a bright red color when they bloom throughout their flowering period, which is November to March. It's safe to say that millions of them are sold each year, but you might think twice after I tell you about the urban legend that is linked to them. For decades now, there has been a dark myth that has people believing one poinsettia leaf can kill a human child. It has been a dire warning that goes around every Christmas, warning people not to bring these plants home if they have kids or pets. Some people believe that the plant actually contains a deadly poison. Apparently there has been a reported case that when a child even rubbed up against one of the plants, his face broke out into this brutal rash. So if anyone buys you one of these plants for Christmas, they are probably trying to kill you.
Alright, moving on, number 9, let's talk about mincemeat pies. These delicious looking desserts right here. Well, you might not actually be saying that for long. Well, the mincemeat pies has become a very popular Christmas dish, while legends has it that these desserts were invented back in the 16th century by cannibals. The recipe today calls for fruits, spices, cinnamon, nutmeg. There's also herbs in there, but let's just say that those weren't the only ingredients in this. Well, there was a time where these pies used to have meat in them, but it's rumored that that was stopped so people didn't have to guess, what type of meat was actually in these pies, because you never know if people tried to follow the old traditions and maybe slip in some human meat.
Sliding to the number 8 spot, we have Belsnickel. Now, most people will think of The Office when they think of Belsnickel, but there's actually a weird and creepy legend tied to the character. It's an old German legend that started in the early 1800s that this old man in fur would deliver cakes, candies, and nuts to the good children. So he'd kind of act as if like he's Santa giving gifts to the kids on the nice list. Except he was some creepy old man and he would just carry around a whip and he would actually whip the bad children on the night of Christmas Eve. The character was based on an older German myth of a servant of Saint Nicholas. Apparently the figure is actually preserved in Pennsylvania Dutch communities and Brazilian German communities. Listen, everyone can believe what they want, but no man is coming up in my house and whipping my kids. If anyone's gonna do that, it's me. That's probably why I'm not a mom.
Number 7, like I was saying during the intro of this video, Santa Claus might actually be Satan in disguise. The devil is Santa in the flesh. I mean, how terrifying is that? Don't believe me? Well, how do you think that he got his name Santa? It seems pretty random. Maybe it's not so random. It's just Satan rearranged. I mean, why is this man sliding down people's chimneys and breaking into people's houses? Isn't that trespassing? Santa literally has a naughty list so he can keep an eye on them. He gives naughty people useless coal just to mess with them so they feel bad about themselves. It's believed that Santa was inspired by characteristics of the devil.
Making our way down the list, number 6, we have the family tradition. So this creepypasta story surrounds a little girl named Jenna, her older sister, and her family. So part of her family's tradition is to always set up the elf on the shelf. Jenna in particular believes that the elf is real and that it really does move by itself. So one morning they woke up to find that the elf had been moved, but no one had touched it. The mom really had no clue where the elf went, and she's normally the one that would move it. The mom was scared how Jenna would react to the elf missing, but she was so happy about this. She told her family that last night she talked to the elf and told it to go check in on her older sister, who lived about an hour away from them. And sure enough, when her sister woke up, the elf was in her house sitting on top of her coffee machine. This of course freaked everyone out, especially that sister, who was too scared to even move the toy. So at night, she gave it a cookie and talked to it. She said, "Hey, thanks for checking in on me, but I really don't need it. I think Jenna really needs you, so take this cookie for Santa and then please return home." Believe it or not, the next day the elf was back at Jenna's house, cookie in hand. Okay, that one is like somewhat sweet, but mainly creepy. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the possession. So for some reason, ghosts or demons love to possess kids' toys, especially dolls. I mean, take a look at Annabelle, for example, or Robert the doll. Those dolls are evil. But now we have elves on the shelves to worry about. So this next couple decided as a joke to order an elf on the shelf online. But instead of ordering it from, like Walmart or Target, they decided to order it off of the dark web. The doll was marketed as a possessed elf on the shelf, and they thought it was a good idea to actually buy this. And what do you know? Upon opening it and putting it on their shelf, paranormal things started to happen. Like seriously, what did they expect? Anyways, they were haunted by this elf for months, and it definitely ruined their holiday season. But also, that's what you get. Coming in at number 4, we have the prankster elf. So this next family apparently owned an elf on the shelf that was quite the troublemaker. They would go to bed and the next day their house would be a mess. One time their dog's bowl of food was knocked all over the floor. Another time they found thumbtacks scattered all over the floor. Another time they found a bottle of wine knocked over and spilled everywhere. But everyone in the family denies that they did any of these pranks. Now it could just be their dog doing this, but they just found it weird how at every prank scene they would find the elf nearby. Could it be their family just messing with them? Or is their elf on the shelf alive? In our 3rd spot, we have the fires. Don't mess with these elves, because legend goes that they can set your house on fire. So there's this creepy story out there that says one Christmas in 2010, a bunch of families' homes unexpectedly caught on fire. When firefighters investigated, they found that every home had one thing in common. Upon entering their house, they found their elf on the shelf in the middle of the house, in perfect condition. The floor would be burnt and charred, but somehow the elf remained untouched. Quite odd. So it's believed that these sinister elves might have had something to do with these fires. In our second spot, we have the family of elves. So according to the instructions that comes with the elf on a shelf, you are not supposed to touch it. If you do, the elf loses its magic, or something along those lines. It's basically a way for parents to deny ever moving the elves. But in this story, a little naughty boy ended up ignoring these rules and touched the elf. The next day, the boy was nowhere to be found. But beside the elf was another mini elf on the shelf. This time, the elf looked an awful lot like the missing boy. Days went on and the family began to worry. That's when the dad accidentally touched the elf while cleaning the fireplace. The next day, he went missing too, and now there were 3 elves on the fireplace mantle. This elf looked a lot like the dad. Eventually, the entire family of 5 went missing. And when police investigated, they found 5 elves on the mantle, 1 for each member of the family. And in our number 1 spot, we have the elf on a shelf with a knife. This creepypasta has to be the creepiest story on this list. So once upon a time, there were 2 brothers. One brother was quite naughty, and all year round would cause trouble. But during the holidays, he tried to act nice, knowing that his grandma had the elf on the shelf and it was watching him. So he tried to act nice so that the elf would report back to Santa saying that he was a good boy. That was until one day him and his brother Neil were wrestling when they knocked over the tree and some ornaments broke. The boy was horrified, for the elf was there watching it happen, and he knew that Neil would tattletale on him. So he took matters into his own hands. He ended up killing his brother and skinning his face. He then wore his face like a mask and used it to trick the elf. He went up to the elf with his brother's face mask and started apologizing and taking the blame for the accident. When his grandma came home, he fake cried and said Neil's death was an accident.
Yeah, okay, his face just like accidentally came off, okay there.
The story ends with a boy locked away in the hospital for Christmas. But he's not mad about this. In fact, he's really happy. To him, this meant that he successfully tricked the elf on the shelf, since he still got Christmas presents.
Number 10. The elves want the children to cause harm. The elves are there to make sure that the kids behave well, right? Well, not for this elf. It said that a little girl woke up in the middle of the night and went crying to her mother, telling her she woke up to her elf whispering evil things to her. The mother brushed this off as her kid's imagination or just a bad dream and sent her back to bed. But this continued to happen night after night. The little girl would wake up screaming after hearing what she said was a creepy voice in her ear. She said the doll would tell her to do bad things like hurt her sister and her parents. The mother started to get concerned about all of this, so one night she decided to sleep in the same bed as her daughter. Then at 3 a.m. that night, she woke up to the sound of someone breathing heavily in her ear. She turned and beside her was none other than the elf on the shelf. Creepy. Number 9. They can create fires. Yep, you heard that right. Those little dolls can set anything on fire. In 2010, a bunch of families' homes randomly caught fire. When firefighters investigated, they found that each home had one thing in common. They all had an elf on the shelf. Now, you'd think with a fire, the elf would be destroyed, but nope. When entering the house, the elf was in the middle of the floor and was in pristine condition. In every house. It didn't melt, it had no marks on it, it was perfect. Due to all of this, it's believed that these elves set fires on purpose. Number 8. The elves can just appear. So many people know you can buy an elf on the shelf for around $30. But what if I told you that an elf could appear in your house without you buying it? A story is told by a mother who said that her daughter Ava woke her up one night asking where Jingles was. Confused, the mother asked who Jingles was, and Ava said it was her elf, and that Jingles was tapping on her window, so she let him inside. The mother tells her they don't have an elf, but after going out into the living room, she sees the elf in their Christmas tree. She sends Ava back to bed and throws out the elf. The next day, Ava asks where Jingles is, and the mom said Jingles isn't our elf, I don't know where he came from. Ava follows this up saying Jingles isn't going to be very happy. That night, Ava wakes up her mom again, and the elf is sitting on her mom's bedside table, holding a hammer, smirking, and her phone is shattered. So she throws him out again. On Christmas night, the mom eats the milk and cookies for Santa and finds Jingles back in the Christmas Christmas tree. She also finds a note from Ava that said, "Jingles is mad at you and says this is what I have to do. He says he will take me to the North Pole and I will meet Santa and get lots of presents. He tells me things at night, and last night he told me to put the funny powder in your milk." After reading this, the mother threw up and fell to her knees in front of the Christmas tree, where she saw Jingles on the floor in front of the tree next to the presents. And the last thing she saw before passing out was 3 boxes of rat poison that he was sitting on. Number 7. The elf can travel from different houses. As if an elf moving around your home by itself isn't creepy enough, apparently these elves can travel to different houses without being noticed. A college student went back home for Thanksgiving and her elf Humble was on the mantelpiece. Her younger sister Jenna still believed in the elf, so it was set up. The next day when she was going to leave, her mother asked her if she knew where Humble was, as he was missing. When he couldn't be found, her mom told Jenna. To everyone's surprise, Jenna was delighted at the news. She said that she told Humble that she was worried about her older sister living away from home and asked if he could spend some time at her apartment to make sure that she was safe. And that's where he must be. After the hours-long drive back to the apartment, she got inside and found Humble in the kitchen. She took a picture and texted it to her mom with the message, "Did you do this?" Which she didn't. They had no clue how it got there. The next day, Humble disappeared and reappeared back at her parents' house. The day after, it came back to her place, so that night she set up her phone to record Humble, but her phone malfunctioned and Humble escaped back to her parents' house. He had gone back and forth between the houses for weeks and had the older daughter freaked out, which I would be too.
Number 6. Santa Claus might be very depressed, and he might be suicidal as well, and Christmas might come to an end. Santa every year has to fly around giving gifts to the nice kids. By Christmas time, he has to be as fat as possible because that's what society wants him to be, especially the kids. So Santa has to eat all day and all night, and he has to eat as many cookies as possible to train his body for Christmas time, because everyone leaves cookies for him. With all the strict rules and the same thing over and over again, Santa might be super depressed, and it's all our fault. Now, that is something hard to live with. Think about how much Santa has to go through just for our greediness. We want Santa to do it all, even the impossible. We make him eat all year round and then say, "Okay, now I want you to come down this chimney." Of course, it's the smallest chimney. Well, let's just hope Santa finds his happy place once again and nothing bad happens to him.
Halfway through the list at number 5 is Perchta. So I didn't know that there are evil spirits that come out around Christmas time. Apparently this channel is trying to ruin the holidays for me. There's an urban legend around a dual-gendered spirit named Perchta who will either appear as a beautiful woman or a haggard crone. I'm going to refer to it as a she for this one because I'm going to pretend that it is the beautiful woman. Apparently she would visit homes throughout the 12 days of Christmas and she would determine whether they have behaved all year. You know, the classic naughty and nice list. However, there is nothing classic about hers because if they were a good kid, she would leave them a silver coin. However, if they were bad, she would slit their bellies open, remove their guts, and stuff them with straw and pebbles. That is a little bit intense. I would literally be terrified of December if this was going on every year. However, this would make a really cool scary movie. I might be onto something here.
Number 4. Candy canes were created to symbolize Jesus. The candy cane is in the shape of a J to stand for Jesus, and the red on the candy cane represents the blood of Christ. I mean, this is pretty intense. The cane is like wood, and wood is like the cross that Jesus was on. So candy canes aren't just symbolizing Jesus, it's actually symbolizing the moment he was nailed to the cross. If this is all true, it's pretty morbid to think about. I mean, I love candy canes and I don't think about all that stuff. But now, I'm pretty upset with this one. I think my childhood is ruined, so let's move on. Let's see what Joss has in at number 3.
Cruising into number 3 is werewolves. I know what you're thinking. What do werewolves have to do with Christmas? If they are going to be linked to any kind of holiday, it's probably going to be Halloween. But I'm here to surprise you with the news that there is a dark myth behind werewolves and Christmas Day. The urban legend goes that anyone who was born on Christmas Day would turn into a werewolf. The 1961 movie called The Curse of the Werewolf explains the legend that being born on December 25th is mocking Jesus Christ, so you must be punished. But you don't turn into like an actual werewolf, you're a human who gets possessed and turns into this like werewolf-like monster thing. So you better plan out your pregnancies and hope your baby isn't born on Christmas Day. Taking over the number 2 spot is the legend of Grilla. What's more disturbing than a lady witch eating a bunch of children for pure entertainment? Absolutely nothing. The legend originated in Iceland, and the tale goes that a giant named Grilla has the ability to sense which children have misbehaved all year round. Apparently, she keeps a record of bad children, and come Christmas time, she comes down from her mountain and kidnaps them in a sack. Then she takes them back up to her mountain and she eats them. Like literally cannibal. Eats them, the Hills of Ice kind of stuff. Word on the street says that she will sometimes just eat them whole, or she will turn them into a stew. She is one Christmas visitor that you do not want to see.
Finally, number 1, Krampus might actually be real. Krampus is half goat, half demon creature.
Everybody, hold on to each other.
Krampus usually comes out during the Christmas season, and he punishes children who have misbehaved, so exactly like how Santa Claus does. Maybe Santa gives Krampus his naughty list. I mean, did you guys ever wonder what Santa does with his naughty list?